It's December 1st, 2001 at Kansas City International Airport. A McDonnell Douglas MD-83 sits at the gate, its tail still proudly wearing the red TWA logo. Inside, the employees, families, and aviation diehards. This isn't just another flight. It's the last one World Airlines will ever fly.
I'm Captain Cliff, and you're listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
Hello and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast. I'm Derek Beeler. Thanks for making us a part of your day. We've got a big one today, so we're going to jump right in and introduce everybody, starting with Mr. Julian Martinson. How you doing, Julian?
Hey, I'm doing well, and thank you for having me on your podcast today. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we are so glad to have you. Will D., how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic. As Julian mentioned, excited to be here, ready to talk about this. This is going to be great.
It's going to definitely be a good one. Shay Jones, producer extraordinaire, pushing all the buttons, turning all the knobs, and joining us today. How you doing, Shay?
I'm doing pretty good. I don't know what to do with my hands. I got so many buttons.
Love it. Will, man, what are we talking about today?
Listen, today's episode, we're going to be focusing on a couple things, especially how TWA got to its final day, the story of that last flight, Flight 220, and what TWA's legacy looks like today.
Absolutely. And you know, Julian, from glory days to bankruptcy, what in the world led to this final flight?
Well, TA flies for its third and final flight right into bankruptcy on January 20, 2001. And so this is typical for some airlines that airlines are very sensitive to economic cycles. And unless they actually save aggressively during the good times to ride them out through the difficult times, airlines will typically invest in more seats and infrastructure and route development and not save money for the lean years. And so this can often lead to the bankruptcy of airlines, which is, we've had numerous airlines go bankrupt over the years.
Absolutely. And, you know, my question would be, I don't know much about airlines. I'm our civil aviation guy, if you will. So, you know, you mentioned, so a lot of airlines are throwing money hard at first. And then, as you mentioned, there's kind of, all that money is being spent. And we're talking about, I mean, how much we talking millions? We talking billions, Julie?
Well, typically to purchase an aircraft like an Airbus 320, you're looking into to acquire it $250 million. So it takes quite a while to pay that off. And not only are there operating costs, fixed costs, and variable costs in keeping the flights going, but airlines also face what is called a depreciating inventory, in that once the airplane takes off, the empty seats on board that plane are lost forever. Unlike a shoe store that could resell the shoes again the next season or the next month at a discount and potentially recuperate some of their monies. And so this is a very difficult part of aviation with the depreciating inventory, and it's very sensitive to economic fluctuations, the cost of fuel, international policy, pandemics, biological episodes or foot and mouth disease, or this, as well as weather phenomenon, hurricanes, earthquakes. People will not want to visit a certain destination because of the weather or the natural disasters. And so it's very sensitive to fluctuations. And so unless an airline is very well established, like the legacy carriers, where they dominate the market and where they have such a penetration of the market that they're able to go into markets with minimal overheads, a new airline coming in and competing with an established airline is always going to be very difficult and very challenging.
Yeah, and Shay, you know, let's talk about the initial TWA final flight. Date, December 1st, 2001. flight number TW222, route from Kansas City International to St. Louis. What aircraft was that, Shay?
Looking at this here, it looks like it was. I don't know. The MD-83. It looks like.
Yeah, the McDonnell Douglas MD-83, tail number N948 Tango Whiskey. I mean, Will, we talk a lot on this podcast about, what it would be like. We talked on the previous episode about what it would be like to be stuck in a Cessna for 64 days. I just wonder how interesting it would be, and what would be your thought process, Will, and the listeners too as well. Leave it in the comment section. What would it be like to be on an airline's final flight, Will?
Sure. I think before I really dive into it and really answer that question, let's talk about who was on that final flight. Let's see who were those passengers on board. And it was a lot of TWA employees, retirees, and their families. And the flight ended up being more like a farewell to the company, a farewell to their livelihood, to this organization that they've known forever. So if you're asking me to put myself into their shoes, I think it would be incredibly emotional.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I've devoted so much of my life and so much of my passion to this one company that, let's be honest with ourselves, completely changed the way we think of commercial aviation, I think it'd be a pretty emotional deal. And if I'm really putting myself, Will D, into those shoes, into the shoes of the passengers on board as an aviation enthusiast, I would be, I don't know, I can imagine just taking a look around, looking at the other passengers, trying to take it all in, soaking in exactly what's going on. And I am on a flight that is making history and ending history. I think that would be a big deal for me personally.
Julian, your thoughts?
Well, this is very typical for airlines, because the issue with airlines is that it's linked with national pride. And so airlines, the whole aviation industry emerged based on national defense. And as we know, a lot of airlines carry our national flags. And so they are linked to national pride. And people have a certain affection towards their own airline, unlike a box of hair coloring product or a t-shirt manufacturing company. People feel very strongly towards their airline. And when an airline, especially a legacy carrier, terminates its operations, people are moved. Not only is it the end of a corporate entity, but it's the end of something that people identify very strongly with, much in the same way as they do with our soccer team, or more recently, like the Hudson's Bay, which is a company in Canada that has been around for 125 years of history. And so when that ends, it's the end of an era. And so people respond very emotionally to those types of things. And if you're in the industry working on one airline or an aircraft, and even when that aircraft is decommissioned, there's a part of sadness that goes on with that. And I can be a testament to that. When I was a flight attendant, I flew on the aircraft IGS with Air Transat. And 20 years later, I was in Toronto working at the airport, and there was that aircraft IGS. And I was like, I worked on that airplane. And I went many times across the Atlantic Ocean on that one. And she held me safe inside her wings. And she was also going to be decommissioned. And so that was the end of that. So there's always that little bit of heart-wrenching in that moment.
Yeah, and that's what aviation is to a lot of us. It's a very emotional thing. Shay, your thoughts on, let's put you in their shoes, like Will said. You're a TWA employee. You're on the final flight. What's your thought process?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I feel like for both what Julian said and Will, I mean, a lot depending on what had happened, where we went, what we did, there's going to be a lot of national pride, a lot of personal pride, a lot of pride in the company that you work for and with, and for so many years, however many years it is. I know at some point that, there was a lot of folks were super sad about it. I know I would be, but it would also be kind of cool to say that I was a part of something potentially large. Just like Julian said, hey, we've been through so many flights in that plane, like always got me from A to B. It's kind of similar to like when you have a car for so many years, right? And then the car finally starts to, show signs of I'm not going to be able to use this for much longer. It kind of feels the same way. Like this mode of transportation, this vehicle has gotten me through so many things. There's a lot of really good music that I've listened to in my car. In an airplane. Like, how many times you've been sitting on an airplane and you like meet somebody who you never would have ever met if you weren't there, right? So I think that I would feel very sad and happy at the same time, the fact that I got to be part of it.
It is very much that, and it's, like I always say, aviation's emotional for me. I walk into a museum and I'm at times brought to tears. Everybody listening knows what I'm talking about. It's that thing. But moving on, Will, the clock strikes midnight. After flight midnight. Yeah, after flight 220. That's when the operation completely changed. So we're talking at midnight, all remaining TWA flights are recoded as American Airline flights.
American Airlines really took over, bought out the company in an event to, I would imagine they kept on a lot of the employees that were working for the company and really tried to keep the heritage alive as the name of, not the name, but as the livelihood of airlines moving forward was changing. It was progressing with the future and not staying with old times. TWA its brand effectively disappeared, and American Airlines, already being a jumbo organization, really just kind of swallowed TWA and it was gone. It left kind of nothing behind, and I'm sure the employees and the people who have fond memories of TWA will continue to think about that forever. But when a giant multi-international conglomerate like American Airlines takes over, they're taking over. They're not leaving anything behind.
Yeah, that's it. And Julian, we talk about legacy a lot on this podcast. How does TWA live on?
Well, it lives on in our hearts and in our experiences, and people have very many fond memories about TWA or other airlines that have passed, that have discontinued. And I recall CP Air, which is one of the legacy airlines for Canada, and then it turned into Canadian Airlines. And then Air Canada bought up Canadian Airlines, and they merged. And it always creates some type of tension. And it's good for the airlines to merge because they streamline operations. However, it's not always so good for the passengers because they miss out on competitive pricing. And so if you have two major airlines in a market, they compete for pricing. Whereas if there's just one major airline, like in Canada with Air Canada, and then some smaller airlines, the major airline tends to dominate the pricing. In Australia, we don't do that. They have two major airlines, and so they compete with each other for the market. And so this is where government policy comes into place, and regulation. How many airlines are allowed to dominate the market? One or two, or how is pricing set, and how much influence does the government want in the air travel? And this also opens up the door for international airlines to compete on prices, and we can further discuss the freedoms of flight, particularly the fifth freedom of flight, which is the possibility for airlines to go into other countries and pick up passengers.
Amazing. And something, Will, that we often see, especially in the aviation enthusiast department, we talk about the water canning send-offs, which is typically for a retiring pilot, but this one might say it's a bit different.
Yeah, talking back again about Flight 220, that final flight from Kansas City to St. Louis being a major hub of TWA, if not the largest hub of TWA. Kansas City Airport decided to salute that aircraft and salute the flight crew and the passengers, employees of TWA with that iconic water cannon. And if there's a clip that we could put up onto the screen, or maybe we can attach something in the description of that salute, that has to be just a massive emotional bearing. And I'd like to get some input on Julian, Shay, Derek, if you've ever been on an aircraft with a retiring pilot, or maybe even a final flight of an aircraft that have you ever firsthand experienced or seen a water cannon?
Unfortunately, I have not.
Julian?
I haven't seen it myself, but on YouTube, I've seen it on a few occasions where they do the water cannon, and it's a moving experience to see live or to pass through while the water cannons are spraying water over the aircraft. It's a moving experience.
So, and, Julian, with you having the most experience in and out of airports, airlines, what do you think happened to the hubs? What do you think happened to the employees, the families, and the livelihood of these employees from TWA?
So some employees will retire from the industry, and other pilots or crew, they'll be transferred to other airlines or corporations. And some may choose to pursue other industries, which is always challenging because once you're in the aviation industry, there's a level of fondness that comes with that type of an energy and the global experience and the international exposure and the energy that an airport and an airline has is very unique. It has still a lingering flair and pizzazz to it that other industries don't have. And so once you're used to that, it's hard to find that same type of vibe in other industries.
So I know there are still a handful of things out there that represent for TWA and the culture behind it and what it represents, not only for America, but for the airline that shaped modern aviation travel today. I know that there's a TWA hotel at JFK in New York. There's a couple different things, museums, archives, enthusiast groups that still talk about TWA as a very fond memory and a massive part of aviation history. After all, that's what we are, right? The History of Aviation podcast. But also, there is a Boeing 737-800 that is painted currently in a iconic TWA kind of a livery in the colors that's represented that airline, and it still flies around today. I've never seen it, but boy, I'd love to.
It would be awesome. And, in closing, I think an interesting questions for our listeners is, let us know in the comment section, have you ever been on a TWA flight? I personally have not, and I will go around the table. Julian, you ever been on a TWA flight?
No, sorry, I have not.
Shay's too young. Have you been on TWA flight? I'm just playing. And Will, I assume you haven't either. But any of our listeners that have, let us know in the comment section. Was it different than any other airline? What was neat about it? What was not? Let us know in the comment section below.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some stories about those of you who have been on the flights. And I don't know if we mentioned this at the beginning, but you got on an airplane today and everyone around you's in sweats, slippers, and a big T-shirt. They're flying comfortable. And this not just specifically in 1939 when TWA was coming around, but throughout their flying, their standout point was the luxury and the glamour behind it. The stewardess on board were not marketed as a flight attendant that's there to serve more than they're not there to serve or for safety. It was more of an experience. They were going to wait on you like a waiter at a fancy restaurant. They were going to try to enhance your flying experience as you're there in a suit and you've paid a lot of money to get on this airplane and you're traveling for something greater, not just, taking a domestic flight in your sweatpants.
And speaking of flight attendants, coming up on the next episode, Julian's going to tell us all about flight attendants and safety. So definitely looking forward to that one. I enjoyed it, guys. Another great talk on another great subject.
Before we go, I wanted to show you something, and Derek, you know I have this, but check this out.
Wow.
American Trans Air. And where did you get this?
I found this at a kind of like a thrift store where people have it's kind of like a flea market where everyone has their own little areas, and then you just go and you buy, and each individual cubicle is a certain person. And I was able to get this beautiful thing for $20.
Nice.
Look at that.
Yeah.
That sounds
So I've got a few others, but I'll save those for when we're actually talking about those things. But yeah, I wanted to share this with you guys since we are talking about what we're talking about. How cool is that?
That is awesome.
So cool.
And all things History of Aviation podcast you can find in the description below. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. Where in the world else are we, Shay?
HOAPOD.com. All the podcasting places, Apple Music, Spotify, all the places. If you think about it, and it could be there as an audio, we're there.
Definitely. And let's give a big salute to TWA Airlines. For Will Diener, Julian Martinson, Shay Jones producing, I'm Derek Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
I'm Captain Cliff, and you're listening to the History of Aviation podcast.